Hi, I'm Desiree Adaway, founder and owner of the Adaway Group. I'm a racial equity consultant, trainer, coach, and speaker. I help organizations and small businesses build more resilient, equitable, and inclusive organizations. I am so happy to be participating in the Ask the Expert series through QuickBooks Canada. And I'm happy to kind of dig in with some of the great questions that I got from folks around how do small businesses, and I'm thinking a majority of small businesses, we're talking 10 employees of less. Like, how do you infuse equity and inclusion in your work? So first, let's get clear around some language. Equity ensures that each person has what they need to thrive, right? And on the other hand, equality says treat everybody the same. And where equity says we all have different starting places and we all have different needs. So organizationally, equity is that fair and just treatment of all people, demonstrated through systems and knowing that individuals have vastly different access to opportunities, and thus they need different resources to be really successful within your organization. It's also this like intentional design and execution of fair policies, of fair processes, of trainings, of systems and structures, right? So it is all of the boundaries and the foundations that are going to keep your business going. And so as a business owner, you want to operationalize equity, right? So we think about diversity being something you count, inclusion is something you feel, but equity is how you build for and sustain inclusive, courageous, and diverse cultures. So small companies need values, and these values will hopefully help you drive decisions around DEI and racial equity work. So y'all need to think about and discuss intentionally and often, where do you stand publicly on commitments to social justice and racial equity issues? And have a plan in place for how you will make these public when necessary. So one thing I always encourage businesses to do is create diversity statements for your company, right? And this is one that reflects your commitment to DEI and racial equity. It speaks honestly, right, and transparently about the work that you're doing and all of your aspirations going forward. Right? The statement that you put together should live on your website and your job ads, on grant applications, portfolio applications, should be shared with a larger community, including your vendors and contractors and partners. You want to get real clear around language, like I started when I first started this video, right? And everybody will have different understanding and different definitions for what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. So as a company, you really want to ground yourself in making sure everyone understands what you mean when you're using language. And that having that shared language is critical for being able then to operationalize the work that you're going to be doing. And so when we think about operationalizing equity, you want to make sure that you have, at the very beginning, fair and standardized salary offers for staff or vendors. And this is important to avoid creating pay gaps from the start. Once you have pay gaps built into your structure, it's really hard to go and clean that up. So you want to think about, if you have a larger company, what does pay transparency look like, and what does maybe a pay audit looks like, so you can make sure that everyone is being paid equitably, right? You want to continue to center equity when you're making offer processes, right? So if I'm making a job offer to my first or second or fifth staff person, I want to be transparent about salaries and benefits up front. Because this is where our implicit bias enters these offer process when we find ourselves negotiating a more kind of robust package for people we know or have a lot in common with. That's when all of our personal biases show up, right? And so the more you can standardize the process, the better it will be, right? Your business should also look like the communities you serve, right? I want you to think about your sphere of influence and how are you activating and manifesting your DEI goals so that you're building stronger relationships with communities that you may not have currently, right? And making sure your contractors and vendors understand that you're explicit about your values around racial equity and making sure that their values are in alignment with yours, right? Think about how you're designing your services and products, right? Always having awareness around how they might impact different identity groups. And also not only who always uses your product, but who never uses your product and why, right? So it's bringing some awareness around who does something always impact and who does it never impact? And who do we ever never hear from to know if it's impacting them at all? I want you to also really think about representation, right? Are you an all-white company or an all-male company? Then that's who you are, but be transparent around it as you're doing this change work. And again, in that equity statement, be really honest about what you're trying to do to change that and why you know and see it as being important to change. Partner with folks in your sector. Invest and amplify voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color in your field, right? So say you're a florist. What does it look like for you to partner with the Latinx florist across town or the Indigenous-owned florist or gardening store? What does it look like for us to think about these folks not as our competitors, but as our collaborators and partners in doing this work? Amplifying voices that you know are not a part of your sector is a great way for you to live into your DEI values. And it's also, we have to bring a deeper analysis to this work, right? Like, so who routinely does what tasks for your company? Really looking at gender and racial dynamics and how we're socialized into roles. And what does it mean for you to create a culture where you question this? Another really important piece for you to be more equitable in your company is to think about performance feedback. Setting aside 4 times a year to talk to folks and acknowledging gender and race as a part of how it's impacting work, right? So creating a culture that fights the sense of isolation for the first or the only, and any unspoken expectations and burdens that we know these folks may carry in predominantly white spaces. And the last bit of advice that I really want to share is it's really important to know that as a company, you're going to mess up. As individuals, you're going to mess up. And as companies, you're going to mess up. And be ready to think about, what does accountability mean? And think of accountability not as being punitive, but being as a way of staying in deep relationship and connection with each other. So think about what is necessary for an organizational apology. How do you take ownership and not downplay what's happening? How do you apologize without using this kind of boilerplate legalese, and really talk about your mistake and the learnings from that mistake? And how do we learn publicly? And this takes courage. This takes a lot of courage and bravery. And so my last bit that I really want to leave y'all with is knowing and understand to do DEI work and to really infuse equity into your structure and your organization or your business, you got to be courageous. And you got to be able to step out in ways that maybe other folks in your sector are not, right? You have to do personal and interpersonal work about what does it mean to be race intelligent and gender intelligent leaders. And we have to do work that says, I'm going to be brave, and I am knowing that I am going to mess up and it is okay, but I'm going to ultimately do what is right for my community and live into my values, not just profess them. I hope you find these tips and tools helpful to you as you're really thinking about how do you infuse more equity into your small business. I want to thank QuickBooks Canada and the Ask the Expert series for allowing me to share some time with y'all. And please make sure you send me more questions. I am always around and always hoping that I can be of service to small business owners as they are making their values of DEI work, manifesting that in real life. So y'all take good care.